awakening. So, today's kind of a special day for me. And it's not something I talk about a lot, especially not like when I'm standing in front of the whole, center, the entire center, all you guys. But yeah, you guys are awesome for being here. This is gonna be special. So I want to show you guys a photo of the worst day of my entire life. So this is the 10th of November, 2004, the worst day of my life. And I don't know, this is like, I kind of have butterflies talking about this. That's me at Jackson Memorial Hospital, and I'm getting a bone marrow transplant, actually a bone marrow stem cell transplant. And I say this is kind of the worst day of my life because it was like a really, really dark time for me, like thinking, because I had cancer, I had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And the thing is, it's like it's a terminal disease. If you don't treat it, like you'll die from it. And I had cancer, and I had gone through chemo and stuff and gotten better for a couple of years. And then I had a relapse. And so luckily in the meantime, I had some like stem cells stored away and cryogenically frozen. And so on this day, I'm in the hospital actually getting like the stem cell infusion. They had done a thing like for about a week. I was getting chemotherapy that killed all the bone marrow, and they, infuse the stem cells, and then they kind of wait and watch and until like the bone marrow starts to actually kind of come back, and then they can see like you start producing white blood cells again. So it's like for a little while you're sort of sitting there with no immune system. So it's kind of a special day. So this is kind of like my second birthday. That's why I say my cloning day. And it was a really dark time for me because it's like I was sort of like in this dark place thinking like that like God has abandoned me. Like I really didn't believe in God or anything, and thinking like I'm here all alone and I have nobody, and like, am I gonna live or die? So it happens to be my anniversary, November 10th. It's my second birthday. So that's why I'm half Cancer and half Scorpio, because the day I was born was in Cancer, and the day I was cloned was in Scorpio. So they're both water signs. So that's what I say. So what happened was, because of that event, that sort of is what sort of started me like going down a spiritual path, because like I was there in the hospital and I was really like not feeling it, and I was just sort of feeling like lost and abandoned. And, even like my brother had tried to call me. I have a brother, he lives in Colorado. He's older, and I'm the baby of the family. When you say you're the baby of the family, people say it actually makes you look younger. Like if you say I'm the oldest one, then it makes you look older, but you're the baby of the family, it makes you look younger. So I'm the baby. And my brother had called me, and he was trying to like tell me like, you should really think about, like praying and like asking like Jesus to help you. And he was saying all these things to me. And I was there in the hospital, like listening to him. He talked to me for about 3 hours or so. And also because like he's in Colorado, like he kept me on the phone until like 2 a.m. And I'm like, do you realize how late it is here? And like, I need to get my rest. Like I just had a bone marrow transplant. He's kind of bothering me. And it was tough because I was like at such a low point, and it actually like kind of hurt for somebody to say stuff like that to me. It was like not stuff I wanted to hear. And it got me kind of emotional. Like when I got off the phone with him, I was like really, really like feeling depressed and down. Like, he had the best intentions trying to help me and everything, but it's just like kind of like, I didn't receive it very well, let's say. And like luckily that night I was watching TV, and George Carlin came on, and it just like wiped all that stuff away. Like I'm a big George Carlin fan, but like all the cynicism kind of came in. I was like, I felt right after that. But so I was in this really dark place, and what sort of happened was I sort of gradually events started happening in my life that I started to look for answers, after that. And the thing was, they say like when the student is ready, the teacher appears. And I wasn't really ready yet. But as I sort of slowly became ready, things began to sort of pop up for me. Like things that I could digest at the time. And you know, I was very lucky, like, to have the bone marrow transplant and get better and get healthy, which is like funny because, you know, they say like faith will heal you, you know, if you have faith, but I had no faith at all. So I can only really like thank science, you know, for it. And because I was like actually like sort of depressed and suicidal in the hospital. Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I was just kind of like, I just did what the doctors told me. I didn't even really like, I don't know. I was in a rough place. Yeah. But like, it was definitely not like a spiritual, active, like faith, like, oh, you know, thinking about anything. I was just like, let me like just do what these doctors tell me to do, so get off my back, you know? It was funny to me that there was people like in the hospital with me that would say no to the doctors. They'd be like, oh, you need to do this, we need to take blood. They'd be like, no, I'm not gonna do it. I'm like, really? You can say no to these people? Like, I just do what they say, you know? And then they like me. I'm a great patient, you know? So what I wanted to kind of talk about was sort of, you know, enough about me. Let's talk more about me. This is kind of like, so I thought I could talk a little bit about, you know, my spiritual journey, and then maybe you guys can relate to it. Because a lot of times I don't like to talk about my bone marrow transplant and stuff because it's not like I really want, because some people like feel sympathetic, or, you know, some people are like, oh, you're so strong, you're so brave. I'm like, not really. I kind of just like, I was kind of like, it was almost like I was on autopilot through the whole thing. And I know I'm not the only one here in the center, maybe not even in this room, who's had cancer before, you know? So it's not like, at the time, a lot of people kind of like really like try to make you feel good and say things like, oh, you know, every day's a gift and stuff like that. And I kind of like, that's why I don't like I don't want people to feel sorry for me. So that's one of the reasons I don't really talk about it a lot. But in this context, I felt like, especially because today is the day. Today's my 17th birthday. so I say it. Today's a good day. Today's a good day to talk about it. And next year I can smoke and vote and, you know, do all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I think that's why I look so young still, you know, for being my age, right, guys? I look young, right? You don't know how old I am, right? So, thank you. So there's a few things. So sort of like for me, the way it kind of worked was things would sort of pop up in my life, and they popped up at the time when I was like ready to accept them. Like a friend of mine was like, oh, you got to see this movie. So there's this movie, and I've actually talked about it here before, a couple years ago. There's a movie called I Heart Huckabees, and it's about a guy who's having an existential dilemma. So he hires two existential detectives to come in and solve the mystery of his existence, basically. It's a pretty like whacked out movie, but there's a few like really, really good like pearls of wisdom in there. So one of them happens to be, you know, Dustin Hoffman is in the movie, and he goes to see him in his office. He's an existential detective, and he has this blanket, and he says, you see this blanket? This blanket is the universe. He says, everything in the whole universe is this blanket. He says, so over here we have the Eiffel Tower in Paris, and over here is you, and, you know, here's somebody dying, and here's, you know, somebody being born. So he's like, okay, so everything is in the blanket. So then the guy says, well, what's outside the blanket? He says, no, it's just more blanket. So he says, everything is connected. So something about seeing that, like, clicked with me. And I was like, okay, I don't know, like when Dustin Hoffman says it, you can believe it, right? So I said, everything is connected. So he starts talking about this blanket truth, where we start to see, you know, ourselves and others, and we see others within ourselves, with everybody being connected. And I don't want to spoil the movie too much. I think you should all go watch it. But the guy who hires the detectives actually has like this enemy, this guy who's like gotten him fired from his job and is like taking over his life. It's almost like if I was here in the center and somebody came in and started to like be competitive and try to like take over doing what I do or something like that. It was kind of like that. And so he hated this guy, And by the end of the movie, he realized like, oh, me and this guy are like actually the same. Like, you know, and in his mind, he sees him like dancing around with him and everything, and he starts to really get it. So it just presented these ideas in a way that I could grasp them. And so, after this experience of seeing this movie, I started to look at things a little bit differently. They have this thing in the movie where, like, it's Jason Schwartzman and Mark Wahlberg, and they're sitting there, and they are smacking each other in the head with this like rubber ball. And when he smacks him in the head, he goes, "What?" And then for a second, like his mind goes completely blank, and they experience what they call pure being, where there's like no thoughts, there's no judgment, they're just in this state. And so he's like, "Oh, hit me again." He hits him again. He goes, "Whoa!" You know, for just a second, he has that sense of like pure being, like none of the thoughts, anything. And they're like, "We just need to do this all the time. We could stay this way all the time." They say, "No, inevitably we get drawn back into the human drama." But I would realize sometimes, like, okay, this is our goal, to get to this point where our thoughts and our judgments and our fears and insecurities can be silenced. Because I happen to be like driving one day and I look on the side of the road, and there in the sidewalk in Lake Worth, there's a flower growing through the middle of the sidewalk. And I just stopped for a second and like stared at this flower. And then I realized like, oh, I'm in pure being, just like in that movie, you know? And I started laughing to myself. And I'm like telling my friend about it later. I'm like, "You should know what happened to me today." I like just stopped thinking for like just a second, you know, and it was amazing. You know, so it sounds kind of funny, but I don't know, maybe you guys being here, maybe you can understand what this is like. But what occurred to me, like, as I'm progressing in this time, was that I needed to make some changes in my life. And I had a lot of people in my life, and not that they're bad people, but we were, like, as a group, kind of moving in the wrong direction, you know? And so over time, I started to change, you know, my environment. I changed the people I was hanging out with. I changed the things that I was doing, and, you know, the places where I was going. And gradually, over time, you know, when I go from being, because I don't want to say that these are negative people. Actually, like, a lot of them kind of grew up and they have families and kids, and they're like pretty much normal now. But for me, it was just like a toxic time in my life that I had to really move on. And so I started to change things, and you know, when like Friday night came, instead of going out with my friends and doing what we would do on Friday night, I made some new friends that would do more positive things. I started going to this open mic night thing and playing music and drinking coffee, you know, and for me, it was a very positive change. I started to surround myself with positive people. And so this is what led to, a couple years later, me signing up for the first time I took a Tai Chi class. So, and this was kind of interesting. I had a friend that was really into like meditation and stuff, and I didn't know how to do it, but my friend was always talking about it and how good it was. And he signed up for a Tai Chi class. So I said, you know, I'm going to join it with you. So actually, it was a group of us, like 4 or 5 of us, that all signed up for this class. We kind of like went and like took it over. And we started doing the breathing and the movements. You know, the first class, I got hooked, you know, and I was like, this is amazing. Like breathing and moving and meditating. And I was like, okay, here we are. My friends were like, this is terrible. This is so boring. I'm never coming back here again. But I was like, I like really enjoyed it, like way too much. So the original friend I had that was going to sign up, that I signed up with, he and I kept doing it. Other friends kind of left over time. But, you know, I learned a lot of things from doing this Tai Chi, you know, and it's one of those things everybody kind of thinks they know what it is because they've heard about it or seen it. But in Tai Chi, we're always talking about Yin and Yang. You know the symbol with the white and the black. It kind of looks like a cookie or something. And this is a concept that, you know, you can't point at anything in the world and say that's yin and that's yang. But what it is it's two sides that are always trying to form a balance. And it's relative. You know, like the theory of relativity you know, if I'm standing here and a car is going by, you say, is a car going by me or am I passing by the car? It depends what position you're in. If you're sitting in the car, you're like, oh, that person just went by me. But if you're standing here, you go, oh, that car just went by. So it's all about relativity. So yin and yang, it's about, you know, when one force becomes too strong, then it balances out to the other force. So we're always trying to find this sense of balance. When we begin the Tai Chi form, we stand with our feet shoulder width apart and our weight perfectly, you know, divided between both legs. And in this state, they call it Wu Ji, which means nothingness or no thing. And it's at this point where you try to actually bring everything together. And actually, they call it nothing, but it's really about being in a state of oneness. But what happens is Wu Ji gives way to the Tai Chi, which is, Tai Chi actually means the grand ultimate. So what happens is you're standing there and you're trying to like empty your mind and have no thoughts, but then you need to start moving. And you say, like, where does that thought come from? And where's that point where the one thing turns into two things, where I'm shifting my weight, shifting the weight, you know, so now all my weight is on my one leg, all my weight is on my other leg. And you go from this state of being one to the state of being two, and always trying to find this balance between the two things. And you go, where does these thoughts come from? You know, and it's an interesting kind of question. But it's in this way, it's a very easy way for a beginner having so many thoughts, you know, and just like not being able to control the mind, to be able to breathe and move, and the mind stills, and we find balance. And I don't know if I just had like, some of my friends said maybe I was Asian in a past life or something, because it just took to it. Like, for me, it was like, you just tell it to me and I believe it, and I go with it, and I study and practice, and like, it became like my life. But some other people, it's like, I don't know, they just don't seem to always get it. But this idea of like where our thoughts come from, and when we have that intention, and is it really in the brain? Like, is the brain having a synapse, or is there something above it where the thought comes from? The thought, you know, when I'm standing there and I go, okay, I'm gonna lift my arms, you know, it travels through the nervous system, and, you know, science can tell you that the nerves are conducting the pulses and moving the muscles, but it's like, who decided to move it, you know, and where did that decision come from? Because it's not just a physical thing, it's this spiritual thing. It's more than we can see or detect with our modern instruments. So, I don't know, that kind of stuff. I find it interesting. So, as we go to this state of Tai Chi, when we're looking for this balance, as we end, we bring it back to the state of oneness again. Everything comes back, and we can empty the mind and just be present and be ourselves. After I was studying Tai Chi for about a year, I started actually practicing sitting meditation and breathing meditation. And I happened to find some stuff at the time, so I'm going to bring this back, because now in preparing for this talk, I started going back and watching all these old things again, because they're still on YouTube, these old like meditations I did, and they still mean so much to me. But I'm like, man, if I came here and just showed it to you guys, they might be like, what is this? Like, it's kind of old and kind of funny, but it's still relevant to what we're doing. You know, everybody, like, even I come to Spiritist Center, and people are still trying to grasp like the same things. We're still having the same struggles. And I found this series of videos about what is meditation. So the first video, they say, what is meditation? And they do a brief meditation with breathing. And we say, like, you know, we have these busy minds. And when we practice meditation, we can finally, you know, calm our mind, and we can, you know, get to this point where we're, you know, present, and, you know, some people say mindful, and we can let go of the busyness of the mind and get focused, you know, and instead of, you know, having our mind control us and take us away in other directions and being distracted, we can actually be aware and be present where we are. Another video talked about improving our relations with others. Relationships. Sorry, not relations. That sounds funny. Improving our relationships. And it's funny because she says things like, you know, when we meet somebody, it's as if a lot of times we don't say this, but it's as if we're saying, you know, okay, now that we've met, your job is to make me happy, and if you don't do it, I'll fire you and I'll find somebody else, you know. And she says, is that really what we want? You know, and that leads us to be lonely. So we need to actually like become aware of these type of behaviors and change that, because if we ultimately want to be happy, we need to have good relationships with other people. And you know, relationships are very important to us. You know, it's one of the most, you know, things that we focus on the most in our lives is having relationships, you know, with our partner, with our coworkers, you know, with our families. So we want to be able to approach relationships with with awareness. We're not just going through things on autopilot. Another great one that I found was about practicing contentment. So this was interesting, where the speaker talks about, you know, are we really content with what we have, and how are we trying to find happiness? Are we looking for happiness in outside things? So are we going and trying to get the latest phones or the latest cars, or, you know, are we working just to pay the rent and to, you know, accumulate things? Are we trying to, you know, fill our insides with things from outside, or are we, you know, focusing on what's inside? And he talked about, you know, even, you know, we look at other people, especially, I don't know if you guys have heard of this Instagram thing, but there's so many people on Instagram, it's like their life, it just seems like they just travel and take selfies and somehow they make money from that, you know? And so they talk about like, what does contentment mean to you? And are you content with what you have? When you look at what other people have, it seems like everybody, like, oh, of course they're content, like they're on a beach somewhere, or, you know, they have the house, they have the car, you know, and I don't have those things, so I can't be content. But the truth is, like, no matter where we are or what we have, we can always find contentment, you know, just by having that calm acceptance, you know, of what we have in our life. And there was another talk, the one that actually I really like the most, where the speaker talks about anger. And he talks about, he says, going through life with the brakes on. So he tells this story about a guy walking a dog, a puppy bulldog, he says. And this guy is walking the dog, and the dog has no intention of being walked. So the dog is just standing there like that. He says as the guy's like pulling it, its nails are scraping on the sidewalk. And he says, isn't that so much like us a lot of times, where life is coming along and we're like just saying like, no, 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 you know? And he talks about a lot of times he tells a story about, you know, being at work. And he says, you're at work and, you know, your boss comes along and says, oh, can you take care of this? Can you handle that? And you say, sure. So you're juggling a lot of different things, multitasking, and maybe you're even feeling like, oh, I'm doing a good job. I'm really in the groove. I'm really getting this done. And then the boss comes along and says, oh, can you just handle one more thing? You're like, sure, I can fit that in. You're sort of juggling all these different jobs. And the boss says, oh, and one more thing, and one more thing before you leave. And all of a sudden you're kind of like dropping the balls, you know? And he says, like, that's what happens is with our mind of anger, we start to like have that rejection. We start to say like, no, like instead of saying, you know, yes, we're saying like, no, inside of our minds, like, no, this is not what I want to happen. He tells this story about, you know, waiting for a train. And he says like, okay, if you sit and watch as you're waiting for a train, you'll see it on almost every stop. As people are coming up, running towards the train door, reaching out, and then the door closes before they get on. He says, and almost every single time, the reaction always the same. You go, like, no, you know, every single time. So and he says, like, what did you expect to happen? Like, people always look up towards the conductor as if the conductor, like, did this to them on purpose. Like, he planned the whole thing out. Like, oh, I'm going to wait till he gets there and then close the door. But he says, like, so what if we could transform this idea? Instead of saying no to life, we start to say yes. So that kind of leads me into the next thing. So this is kind of like, it sounds funny, but there's this movie called Yes Man with Jim Carrey. And he stumbles into this like self-help conference where the guy is saying, say yes to everything. And everybody says, yes. It's like, it's crazy. And he's always saying no. He's like, oh, no. He's a bank loan manager. So they're like, can I have a loan? He's like, no. So he goes to this thing and they kind of brainwash him where he has to say yes to everything that happens. So somebody says, oh, hey, you want to go see a movie tonight? Yes, I don't remember all the different things, but he says yes, and it's like all of a sudden he's like married to a woman from out of the country, and he's taking skydiving lessons and doing all these things that like these crazy things, and it's a silly like funny movie, but that kind of actually like changed the way I thought of things. I said, like, what am I saying no to in life when I could be saying yes? And so I got that idea that I should start to say yes. I watched that movie, the silly Jim Carrey movie, and and I started saying yes to more and more things. And so saying yes to life is what led me to going to my first Reiki circle, starting to go to these meditation groups I started going to. That's where I met Larry. and I mean, that's the end of the story right there.
That's where he met you.
Yeah, we went to the Aliu. We went to these meditations with this, crazy people in Del Rey, and that's sort of what led me. It was because of that, because of saying yes to life, that's the reason why I went to Brazil in 2015, like as a chain of events. And when I went to Brazil, I happened to pick up a copy of this book. This is actually the book. I got this in Brazil. We have them here in the library here, but this one is from Brazil. So it's a real deal. Yeah. So it's funny because I was in Brazil. I didn't know very much at all. Like I had heard the word spiritism, but some people in my group, like in my travel group at my table, just happened to mention that this guy Alan Kardec wrote a pretty cool book, And I saw it like in the bookstore there, so I picked it up. I think it was like 50 reais at the time. And then I come back here to Pompano, and somebody from my job told me about the Spiritist Center. I was like, oh, let me check it out. I'll see if I like it or not. And I come here, and they're like, oh, we read this book. And I'm like, that's so funny. I happen to have a copy of that book. It's like, this is kind of weird. Yeah. And that's when I should have started saying no, but here we are. So that's that's where it started. So and what all this leads to, what we're always talking about in Spiritism is self-transformation. So I wanted to just bring up a little bit of a point while I'm here on the soapbox. Is that we always, I don't know about you guys, I don't know how long you guys have been coming here, or I know some of you guys are like career, lifelong spiritists, and some people might be a little new, but if you're here for a little while, you'll start to hear people talk about this question 919, and they talk about what's the most effective means for improving ourselves. I'm paraphrasing. And they always mention about how Socrates said, know thyself. And I've heard this in about 100 different lectures here. And it's the first few times I was like, oh, that's amazing. And after that, I'm like, oh, I've heard that before. But a lot of people don't mention this whole second part that goes on and on and on for like 3 pages, what the rest of it says. And I better try to, we don't have enough time to read the whole thing. But what he basically says is that This is from the Spirit, St. Augustine, right? St. Augustine. What he says is that before he goes to bed at night, I'm going to really paraphrase it. He writes in a journal. Let's say it's a journal. He asks himself, is there anything I could have done better? Is there anything I did that would have hurt or offended anyone? That anything that somebody could hold against me? And so he reflects on his day. He asks himself all these questions, and he looks for ways that he could improve himself. And it's not just coming here and saying know thyself and then mic drop. What it is it's a process, and this is something that I had been doing. I don't want to say I'm like the expert on this, but I'm just saying. A friend of mine told me one time, the same guy from my Tai Chi class, said that before I go to bed at night, I should get a little book and write down. His is very simple: what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling, for the day. So, this is much more in depth in question 919. But he just said, what I'm thinking and how I'm feeling, because I was starting to really build up like a pressure cooker, I don't know if you've seen that movie Inside Out with all the emotions. And the guy anger, he's like, that was me back then. I've changed a lot since then. But that's when we write, if you can, something about that process of sitting and writing, for me, it helped to take the lid off the pressure cooker and release all the steam. And something about the fact that I had to organize my thoughts and put them on paper and look at them. And all of a sudden, it was really, really easy for me to close the book and just let everything go. So, what we're really talking about here, though, is asking yourself, could I have done better? Is there anything that I would have done that maybe hurt somebody's feelings or that somebody would hold against me? And what we're really doing is in the terms of the spiritual awakening, is starting to look at things not just from our own perspective, but trying to see it from other people's perspective, and then trying to get the bigger picture as well. And having this idea and knowing that what we do has consequences, not just here in the material world, but in the spiritual world as well. And we need to look towards the spiritual world and try to kind of look down and look at what is this all really meaning? What's the meaning of all this? St. Augustine says, he says is this really so bad? You put a little bit of effort, a few minutes at the end of every day to have all of eternity to look forward to being happy and to letting go of all this, baggage. He says, I know that many will say the present is certain, but the future is uncertain. But that is precisely the thought that we have been charged with tearing down in your minds. So that was really the revelation for me of getting the Spirit's book and reading it, was really I felt after I read this, I felt now I know the meaning of life. And all the questions, what really led me to sign up for the Tai Chi class and go to Brazil and do all that stuff was all these questions, and I couldn't really say why I was doing it at the time, but now I could say I just didn't know what's the point of all this. I had an existential dilemma, just like the guy from the movie I Heart Huckabees. I was just why is all this stuff happening? Why are all these seemingly random events happening, and why are they sort of leading me? And it feels like it's pushing me forward. Why is all this happening? And now it's you read this and you get those ideas where we come from, where are we going, why are we here, and why do people suffer? So it's all in here. I'm not going to give it all away tonight, but I encourage you guys. There's a lot of people who come to the Spiritist Center for years and years and years and years, and they never read this book. So I came in here and I happened to have the book already, and people were talking about it. So I was like, well, I better read it. And I read it in a month, because I'm not a big reader, but I got it all I was like, oh, I'm probably gonna have to read this again someday because it's 1,000 different questions. But But I was like, let me just kind of get familiar with this stuff really fast. So I would also encourage you not to read this book because they might make you stand up here and talk about it one day. So that's the downside of it. The good side is if you guys read it, then you won't have to hear me blabbering on again about it anymore. So where are we going with that? So there's this movie, there's this other movie. I always talk about movies. There's this movie, tell me if you guys have seen it. It's called Star Wars. It's one of my favorites. Okay. Yeah. So, what was I going to talk about? So we're talking about Tai Chi and the Yin and Yang. Star Wars, they have the Jedi and the Sith. They're both using the Force, right? It's the same Force that they're both using. So, the same things we do can be perceived as good or perceived as evil. But there's this guy in the movie called Yoda. He's like the spiritual guru. You guys haven't seen it, right? I don't want to spoil the ending or anything. I'm always amazed when I meet people that haven't seen Star Wars yet. I'm like, it came out in 1977. So you really got to go watch it, come back here, and I'll wait. But so Yoda is training Luke, and he tells him fear is the path to the dark side. This is just kind of a nice little quote. But what Yoda is actually doing for Luke, and this is why it's worth talking about in a Spiritist center, is he's training Luke to let go of his attachments. So his attachments are fear and pride, anger, jealousy. He's training him to let go of all these things because all of these things will lead him, to the dark side. It will lead him to anger. And, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering. It's funny because there was a guy who did this meditation, and he had lived in a monastery for some time. He lived there, and this monk would always come, this guru. He'd walk around, because when you live in a monastery, I guess in the day-to-day, you have to do a lot of gardening and do a lot of work to kind of keep it up. So he would come up to him when he's in the garden and say, "Are you suffering today?" And he'd say, "Oh, no, today I'm good." He's like, "Okay, good for you. That's great." But then if you said, "Oh, are you suffering today?" He says, "Yeah, I'm suffering today." He'd be like, "Oh, you must be very attached." And he said that was like the line. He said, if you're suffering, you must have attachments. You must have some attachment. And so it's not that the suffering is coming from outside of us, like somebody is coming along and making you suffer. The boss that's giving you more work to do is actually making you suffer. It's you, your mind of anger causing, let me say it's me. I don't want to say about you guys, but say it's me causing my own suffering. So in this sequence, I've gone back and watched this a couple times just to see this is from The Empire Strikes Back. If you guys don't know, the second Star Wars film, and I've watched this before, just to be nerdy and just to watch the Yoda parts again, when he's really talking to him, saying all this stuff, because he says so many good things that when I was a kid and I saw it, I never really picked up. But now that I'm even more of a kid, I'm watching it again, and he says these things like, we are luminous beings, and I'm like, where do these guys get this stuff from? This is good stuff. I don't know who wrote this, but it's good stuff that they write. So, if even if you don't get it from here, you'll find it someplace else. So then that leads me to say, I know what I have to do, but I don't know if I have the strength to do it. So this is a good time, right? So in the beginning of the lecture, I showed you guys a picture of the worst day of my life, right? So I want to show you a picture of the best day of my life. Same day. So what happened to me is I'm sitting there writing in my book, and I'm in this attitude, and I'm praying, and I'm doing my thing, and I'm writing in my book. And I'm thinking about, what's happened in my life in the last, now it's been 17 years, since that time. And I'm thinking about, this time of my life was such a dark time, and I was suffering so much, and, how bad it was. And I started to think about all the good things that came out of it, and how all that suffering actually made me stronger, and how even though I thought I was all alone, feeling all alone, really I had my family with me. They were there. They were taking care of me. They were like coming to visit me every day. And I was never alone that whole time. And all the things that I thought were like the most terrible things that could have ever happened to me actually ended up being some of the best things that ever happened to me. And as I was sitting there, like in this state of prayer, I just started saying, you know, thank you to God, like for giving me this opportunity. You know, thank you for the lesson. You know, thank you for the struggle. You know, thank you for all the joy and all the pain. You know, and thank you for this opportunity I have to have a new life. And that's why I want to tell you guys, really, is that you don't have to die to reincarnate. You know, you can you can have a new life starting today. You know, start tomorrow. The day's almost over. But you don't have to die to like change. You don't have to wait. So many people, like, it seems like, oh, I'm just waiting for the next life. Next life I'll do better. You know, like start now. You know, with every breath, you know, we can die and be reborn again. You know, and that's one of those things, like, you know, that the Christians will always say, I don't want to say Christians, but the way that, you know, we're Christians too in the Spiritist Center, but a lot of times in the church they'll say, you know, when Jesus says to die and be reborn again, that's just a metaphor. But, you know, the talking snake is not a metaphor, that happened, but being dying and reborn again is a metaphor. But here we say, no, like, there's reincarnation. We believe in reincarnation. But I just wanted to let people know the idea that dying and being reborn again as a metaphor is still valuable, to know that, you know, I can wake up tomorrow and I can go to work, and even if I see that boss or that coworker that gets on my nerves or makes me angry, I can take a deep breath and decide, like, today I'm going to react differently. You know, today I'm going to choose not to act in my mind of anger. Today I'm going to choose to react differently, even if it doesn't work. You know, even if I make the wrong decision, even if it doesn't really work out, at least I'm going to try something different. And if that doesn't work, I'll keep, you know, trying something else until I find something that works. You know, until I find, you know, and I found, like, I've been working with some people that I would call difficult people. Like, I work in like a pirate jungle prison in the lower Umbral here in Pompano, you know, like with these savage truck drivers, and you know, but they're good people. But like, in the last few years, like, 'cause I've worked there for 7 years, and you know, and the last job I had too, like, I had a coworker. We're in this little office with no window. It was like terrible, and it's just like hot, and the phone's ringing off the hook all day long with angry lunch ladies on the phone. That was my job, and it was like so stressful. And I had this coworker that I couldn't stand, and I'm like, I can't wait to quit this job and go to my next job. I won't have to see that girl anymore. And I get to the next job, and now I just have like another coworker that's like 10 times worse. You know, so I'm afraid to leave this job because I don't want to find out like what's waiting for me at the next one. You know? but that was the experience I've had. Is actually, I've been working there like long enough, and just like some days were just tough. And I was like, I don't think I can make it. Like, some days I really wanted to like just leave, like just walk out and go home and like forget about it. Like, I'll find another job. But I stuck it through, and I prayed, and I breathed a lot. You know, breathing is good. I recommend it. But I'm saying, like, I'll take a deep breath in and like let it go. And, you know, I'll be at work, I'll be like all day long, like trying to let it go. But that's what I have to do. But it's funny because now me and my coworker actually have a kind of a good relationship. You know, I don't even like saying it because it feels a little creepy, but like, we actually like get along pretty well, and we joke around a lot, and I don't know, it's like, you know, it's just, it's funny, but it actually, this stuff kind of works. It was funny because there's a high turnover rate at my job. Let's put it that way. But I would notice that, like, I couldn't stand this guy I worked with too much, but I would notice that other people that he worked with, and I would see them fight when they worked together, but they would leave, they would, get fired, but sometimes they would end up coming back to visit, or they need something from us and come in, and they'd be like buddies, and I'd be like, how can he even stand that guy? Like, and that's actually kind of what triggered, was like, that guy has friends, and so somebody likes him. So what's my problem? Like I said, what do I have to do to get to that point where I become this guy's friend? So that's kind of where it all kind of clicked. But there's been like some transformation there at least, and I can't say like I've made it all the way, but we've definitely come a long way, So I have a picture of the sunset, which is nice. Gonna end on that. So I want to thank you guys for coming on this journey with me, talking about my favorite subject, me, mostly. But I hope you guys could relate to that. Oh, so yeah, like I said, it's my second birthday. So I got my second birthday card, which is actually, I thought this was clever, happy second birthday. So this is actually for a 2-year-old, but it took us a couple seconds because it came to my parents gave it to me from my sister. They went to my parents' house. It's the second birthday for a 2-year-old, but it's my second birthday from the cloning. And I was like, that's clever. So it's funny because it's actually a big deal, like for my family. They're the only ones that usually remember. Like, remembering one birthday is hard enough, like for your friends, but to remember 2 of them is like, just forget about it. The happy second birthday, My sister's trying so hard to have a good relationship with me, and I'm making it like impossible. So, but I sometimes I remember that my sister was the one, like, we don't have a lot in common, but she was there for me, like when I was going through all that stuff. She would come down to Miami every single day from Palm Beach and sit there. And I was like, do you have to get here at 7 a.m.? Like, could you come a little later, like, so I could sleep in? But I'd like wake up and she'd be there doing crossword puzzles, and I was like so annoyed. But it's like, that's kind of a luxury, to be annoyed with somebody that is there, like, helping you and supporting you. Otherwise, like, I'd be sitting there, like, I'll complain no matter what. I'll be like, oh, I'm here in the hospital and nobody comes to see me, and I'm so alone. But so that happens. So, thank you guys. Usually this is a time when we open up for questions, but I feel like I said enough already.
I have one question.
Okay.
You mentioned that the worst day of your life you were in pain. What kind of pain was it?
What kind of pain? Well, the kind of pain that you can't go see a doctor about because you can't tell him where it hurts. It's the inside kind of pain. Actually, yeah, I mean, having cancer is painful. Like, yeah, but what happened was when I started actually getting chemotherapy and stuff, I didn't feel the pain anymore. The chemo actually, besides being like sick for a little while, like because the pain came from inside the bones. So when I first had it, I was like, what's going on? I thought it was, like my muscles were tight or something. I'd always be like stretching and trying to find it, and like using like muscle creams and stuff. I didn't realize like the bone marrow is it's supposed to be like butter, and it was actually more like, fibrous. It was just totally like hollow. So that was happening. So actually, by the time I got to that point of actually having the transplant, the picture I showed, I really wasn't in much pain, physical pain. I was pretty good, but just like on the insides, it's just like a total mess. Like, just totally like in dark and feeling isolated and feeling alone, and not really feeling like there's much hope. It's kind of like just being like dead, like emotionally, just kind of feeling, because I kind of knew that I'm going to the hospital and they're going to do this thing. You're going to have no white blood cells. As they go, they're giving you this chemical that's killing the white blood cells, and they're taking blood tests every day, and your white blood cells are going lower and lower and lower, and you're in this room with HEPA filters, and people have to be really careful. You can't see your friends because you have no immune system. So it's kind of scary, and be like, oh, I'm like extremely vulnerable right now, But the thing for me was like, I was like, well, I'm going to go to the hospital, and I don't really know like if I'm going to live or die, after that, So it was kind of like,
Have you lost, do you think that at this time you lost your faith? Like,
I mean, yeah, I was really out of it before, like, yeah, before I even went.
deep inside you had faith that you were gonna.
Not at the time, not really. I was really like, I would call myself an atheist at the time, and yeah, I was brought up in a family that would go to church and everything, and I turned away from it at a certain age, and I was, I mean, some of my friends tried to argue with me. They're like, oh, well, you must have had a little bit in there still to, and I was like, well, I don't know. We could talk about it, but but
Inside you had some like a little.
yeah,
light,
I don't know.
little bit,
I don't know.
You hear them.
Yeah, I mean, I turned out okay. Now I'm the well-adjusted person you see before you now. Some people might describe me as a miracle.
So when did you change your perspective and calling yourself the worst day and call you the best day?
Yeah.
After you left the hospital, you went to experience
It was only recently that when I was like thinking about it, and I started to pray, and actually it was really like for me, it was that day. It was only maybe a year or two ago I started thinking about it, and thinking like how grateful I am for that experience, and I was like, kind of like, wow, I wish other people, I don't want to say I wish other people had cancer, but I wish other people could have an experience like that where it's kind of like a near-death experience, I guess, but it's kind of, it's something that really makes you question your existence and like, why am I here, and what am I doing here, and where am I going, and and that's why I don't like to brag about it, but it's like the thing that's like at the time, that's one of the reasons I don't talk about it too much is like at the time to me it didn't mean a lot. It only really means a lot to me like now later, like looking back in hindsight, my perspective of the whole thing is completely different, and so now I can look back at it and be like, wow, it's kind of amazing that I could go through something like that, and I still question why. Like, I read the book. I know that we have past lives and we have future lives. I can't say like why that happened. I can have some ideas, like maybe, and maybe I'll find out one day later, like, because, my brother and sister never went through that, so it's not genetic, I wouldn't think. I don't think it's environmental, It's not something like there's no known cause for what happened. So I would assume it probably has something to do with, past life or a spiritual disease or something, but can't say for sure until, until I get to the other side. But I like to come up with theories about it though. Yeah, but yeah. So, well, I hope somehow this was like inspirational for you guys. Yeah.
Because I have some kind of experience the same way. I have a car accident that was a really sad part of my life. But later on, I realized it was my second chance to change it and be better.
Yeah. I mean, when I look back to that wasn't like my only second chance. I've had a lot of second chances. I'm like a cat almost, like 9 lives. When I look back on a lot of things, I'm pretty, I want to say lucky, but, we try to make the most of it. But yeah, I mean, and that's the thing too, is like, I know, there's a famous comedian that just died of cancer too, Norm Macdonald. I really liked his comedy and stuff. He's funny because I could kind of tell he looked like he was getting sick over the last few years. Like he just looked like he was aging really fast. And then I was like, I bet he's got cancer or something. And then he died. And then everybody's like, oh, I had no idea. And I'm like, well, you could kind of see when you looked at him, he didn't look so good, But, he said something about like, oh, I don't like to. he didn't. Yeah, he never told anybody he had cancer either. And he said one time, I bet like if somebody had cancer, they shouldn't tell anybody about it and try to get their sympathy, and they should, like, the best thing they could do is just like live through it and and just and be strong and stuff. And like I can't say I 100% agree with him, but I get what he's saying, like, because I kind of get the same way. Like, I don't like to say it and have people feel sorry for me, and then, it's like, and plus too is like, now I look back and I'm like, I definitely don't want anybody feeling sorry for me, because it's like, I'm kind of lucky and grateful, like, for everything that happened, and especially in I know medicine has come a long way since 2004. I'm sure things are totally different now, but to be in 2004 and to be able to get a stem cell transplant, I think is like, it was pretty new back then, I'm kind of like fortunate that I was in the right place at the right time, and happened to have my parents' insurance and everything, like, because, oh yeah, thanks. I was gonna bring cupcakes or something, but, so thank you. I went on too long, and thank you guys. And stay tuned for some announcements. Does anybody want to do the announcements?
Yes.
Okay, good.